I rise to support this legislation, which would give the New York State Attorney General jurisdiction, exclusive jurisdiction, in certain matters involving police officers and other law enforcement officials. Our democracy is based on laws, not men, someone once said. We can say today that should be laws, not men and women. But the point is, our laws need to be enforced. They must be enforced fairly and uniformly. We need to structure our system so that the law is enforced and people throughout the state can have confidence in the way the law is being applied. Against all who violate the law, including law enforcement officials. We need to have a system with checks and balances and accountability to preserve our democracy. Without them, we would have anarchy, whether by those on the street or those in uniform. The system has to police itself and, in effect, police its own police. Some question has been raised, why not leave this power to prosecute law enforcement in the hands of local district attorneys where it has been for a while? Well, we have seen, Mr. Speaker, it is not working very well, especially of late. First of all, the district attorneys have a conflict of law, if not in law. They work every day with local law enforcement. They develop relationships with law enforcement, and they're dependent on local law enforcement for the proper functioning of their offices. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, the district attorneys are elected on a countywide basis. We want our statewide laws enforced statewide. We want them applied to law enforcement, just as they're applied to everyone else, and we want them done fairly in every county. We don't want them applied more leniently or more harshly on law enforcement in any county. A police officer who commits a crime should not be dependent on where he committed the crime to understand whether he's going to be prosecuted and how harshly he's going to be prosecuted. Now, an issue has been raised as to whether the Attorney General might have a conflict himself or herself, because there may be a situation where the state police are involved. First, I note, Mr. Speaker, that there are probably 20 times more local law enforcement officials than there are state police in the state of New York. I don't have the exact numbers, but we're talking in a couple of thousand maybe. I'm not sure what the number is of state police, somewhere in that neighborhood. A little bit more, a little bit less. There are 30,000 New York City police officers alone, and probably an equal number, if not more, throughout the rest of the state. So the potential for conflict for the Attorney General versus the district attorney is very small. Further, Mr. Speaker, the legislation says that the Attorney General shall appoint and designate a Deputy Attorney General to exercise the powers and duties of this office. We are familiar by watching the nationwide scene, the difference between the top law enforcement official, the Attorney General of the state of New York, and his deputy. And we've seen all of the different ways and all of the different machinations, some good, some bad, about how to delegate authority in the case where the chief law enforcement official, the chief attorney general, believes that he or she should step aside and let the subordinate make the decisions. Further, law officers are very familiar with conflicts of interest. It happens all of the time. They respond various ways. There's something that's called a Chinese wall that's built in a large firm. And the Attorney General's office is certainly a very large office. It is not hard for the Attorney General's office to separate their civil division from their prosecuting division, especially this particular division. So I would suspect that there will be an appropriate separation. Further, Mr. Speaker, I suggest that if the Attorney General detects a conflict, the Attorney General can either ask to have a special prosecutor appointed by the governor, or can decline to represent in a civil matter and have a civil lawyer represent in the case of the conflict. This statute provides for public accountability. It says that the Attorney General shall issue a report so that people can see what factors went into a determination by the Attorney General. And the Attorney General is a high-profile position subject to the scrutiny of the press and the public. So there will be accountability. The public will know what's going on. So in conclusion, Mr. Speaker, I support this approach and I support this legislation. I myself introduced legislation very similar, but I compliment the introducer of this legislation. This is a well-designed piece of legislation, well deserving of our support. So I commend the sponsor. I will vote yes, and I ask all of my colleagues to do so as well.